having lunch today with my boy Justin Bass, JB. We go way back, been friends forever. He's a business manager for a ton of high-profile athletes, big-time superstars, and I can't wait to ask him about what he's advising his clients about financial advice in terms of what do they do when they come into a huge contract and they've had no means, they've never had money, and all of a sudden here's 30, 40, 50, 60, $100 million handed to them. It's going to be fun to ask him what he's telling these guys. What are you telling these guys when they get drafted in the first round and they're going to make $20 or $30 million and they come from a family of no economic means, they've never seen any money in their life, and all this money, boom, hitting them and they're 21 years old, and now you're their business manager, and what do you tell them?
You know, obviously for a lot of people that get drafted in professional sports, they are coming from places where they don't have a lot of experience or education with financial matters, right? So I think one of the first things you have to do is help them understand what the money really means. In other words, if they sign a contract for $30 million, what does that really look like after taxes? And what does that look like after paying various, professional fees and expenses and things of that nature? So one of the first things I do is I sit down with them and do a real detailed analysis of what the contract and what each paycheck looks like. And on the short term, we talk about a budget. If you can't have a budget to help them track their expenses and spending, then there's no real measurable way to track if they're progressing properly or not. And so it's a matter of having the short-term goals and long-term goals, where we talk about, starting the long-term. How much do you want to save from this contract? And let's take that number so we know what the goal is, and then back into how we arrive at a reasonable but sustainable budget. And so once you start with that, you walk through each of the things that they're going to want to buy. And then you're going to talk about needs versus wants, and how there may be enough money in this particular contract to buy all these things, but you don't get paid a lump sum money up front, right? And so
here's $30 million check.
Right, you have a contract for $30 million, but if this is over 5 years, and that's $6 million a year, and after taxes, that's $3 million. So for somebody that doesn't have experience in dealing with that, it can be a bit overwhelming, right? So walking through and establishing a budget, understanding their short and long-term goals, and then once you establish kind of what they're looking to set aside, coming up with a investment plan that is tailored to their goals, both in terms of risk tolerance. Some clients say, I don't care about outperforming the market, but I don't ever want to lose a dollar. And so you're going to make a very conservative investment plan for that person, versus someone who says, look, I'm comfortable taking a little bit of risk, and so maybe that portfolio will be invested a bit differently, not exposing them to tremendous risk, but in order to balance the potential upside of market appreciation and of other alternative types of investments. You might put them into investments that are a little different than that extremely conservative person.
How do you get across to a 22-year-old who's getting handed $30 million, $40, $50 million, or an $8 million a year contract for 5 years, that you're not going to make $8 million a year for the next 30 years. This might only be 5 years. This might be the only contract. You can have an injury, you can have a slump and get released.
Part of what enables professional athletes to succeed is not only their skill set and work ethic, but this air of invincibility, this confidence.
Right.
They always think that this is one contract, but there will be another. So part of what I do is I say, hey, look, if things go well, if you perform well, if you stay healthy, then you may be blessed to have another contract. But my job is to act as though you're never going to have another. So the money you're making today or over this contract is what we have to think of forever, because you're never going to have an opportunity to make this kind of money in a short time. So a lot of it, though, it's really just having conversations. It's getting people to understand that you've been through it before with the experience, and pointing to examples of clients I've worked with before, but then also kind of helping them understand that I'm not there to tell them what not to do, but I'm giving them information so that they can make smart and informed decisions. And I kind of say to my clients that I can talk basketball. I think I'm intelligent, but I don't think that I have the substantive knowledge to come up with a defensive scheme to stop, LeBron James tomorrow. So, and I say similarly, I want you to be able to speak intelligently enough about financial matters that you're conversing. You don't have to be the professional. I have a lot of years of experience in studying and practical work that has trained me to be in this position, but you should know enough about finances that you understand.
You want them to be fluent.
I want them to be fluent.
Educated enough to make decisions and understand what decisions are being made.
Yeah, and understanding the impact of things like how do taxes impact me, and how does investing in this today affect me, and what is opportunity cost, and what is if you tie money up in various certain things, not having that available to do other things where your money's working for you. So I think it really comes back to just a lot of conversations. It comes back to really understanding the individual and what makes him or her work, what's their background, what are their goals. You can have two people that appear to be very similarly situated that might be 22 years old and have the same contract, but they may be in very different financial situations because one might have a child already, or one might have 5 family members that they have to take care of.
Well, that's a very good point, because I know from experience and friends that have gone through it, there's so many these guys and gals, they're coming into all this money and they want to help their friends and family, and they have friends and family and people coming out of the woodwork for help and money and handouts. That's another thing. I mean, that's a quick way to go broke if you're handing out money to everybody. But obviously a lot of these guys, they want to help and do what they can. So what is your advice to them when, okay, they have this big pool of money that just came in, and now you have several people asking you for loans and money and this and that?
I think back to one of my current clients who I've worked with for 25 years, and we laughed together because when he was a rookie, he used to ignore my phone calls. And he knew that he thought the only time I was calling him is when I was calling him to tell him not to do something or not to spend so much money.
Yeah.
And he looks at me and he says, man, where I came from, nobody had shit. And so where I come from, nobody had any money.
Yeah.
So, I have millions of dollars, and if I want to help a couple of people who can't put food on their table, I'm going to do it. And you're not going to tell me not to, because you don't know what it's like to be in that position. Over time, he and I developed a bond. We got to know one another much better. And, today we look back and laugh about it because he's now become one of my great clients who listens. And, our conversations are much more different today, where he's asking about what does his portfolio look like? What kind of investments are we making? What do you think about doing X, Y, or Z? But at the same time, from his perspective, he had to help those people that were close to him. So one way that I talk about that is it's okay to help your family and friends, but there's a right and a wrong way. So a lot of people think that once they make it, the way they help is to give a materialistic item to someone. Yeah. Let me buy an expensive car for this person.
Buy a Lambo for my homies.
Buy an expensive car, whatever. And I say, look, it's interesting. This won't make sense at first, but when I explain it, it makes sense. I say sometimes by your generosity, you're doing more harm than good. Because if you have a friend that is never gonna be able to afford a Range Rover, and you go buy this person a Range Rover, what you're really doing is either setting your friend up for failure or creating an opportunity where you're gonna have to carry that expense forever. And so even though your intentions are good, you want your friend to feel what it feels like and to participate in it, it's not sustainable. So what I often tell the clients is, you want to help people, and that's great. Well, let's figure out ways where you can help make them independent. So it's one thing if you want to buy a small gift, this or that, or you want to buy a house for your parents because of all the work they put in to get you to where you are. But you're better off investing in your friends and your family members in ways that can lead them to being independent. So pay for their education, or use your contacts to make phone calls where they can get internships and learn from professionals certain skills that they may not have access to otherwise. But it's much more meaningful in the long run, because what you're doing is you're empowering them to find a way to be financially independent, and at the same time you're not creating a way that you have to carry them forever.
Yeah, it's teaching them to fish, not just giving them what you caught today.
Exactly.
And it's like long term, trying to set them up so that they can pick their people up with them, rather than, like you said, it's almost an anchor. If you give them a fancy car, you give them a Rolex, this and that, that's all great and feels good, but that's not teaching them to be independent. That's not educating them to rise from their situation.
It doesn't last forever unless you handle it appropriately and you have a reasonable but sustainable budget, I often tell my clients, I say, look, you can live like a king for a couple years or a prince forever.
Right.
And princes live very well, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot you can do, but maybe 2 or 3 houses is okay. You don't need 4 or 5.
Right.
Or you can only drive 1 car at a time. You don't need 7 cars. And it's interesting because people are just predisposed to different behaviors. I mean, some of my clients who are my best clients aren't my best clients because they were necessarily the smartest. Some of them were very smart and made the right decisions. Other ones were motivated by things like fear, saying, God, I came from this place. I never want to go back there. And so I'm going to protect what I've got. And fear is a great motivator. Yeah. Now, ideally, they're also picking up lessons along the way, and we're having a lot of conversations, and they're really becoming smart about it too. But people are people. Individuals operate off of different things that motivate them, and I think part of the challenge for me, which is also the exciting part, is figuring out how do I get through to this person in a way that's going to be effective, which is going to be different than how I get through to that person. But at the end of the day, part of it is about figuring out which buttons to push and how to introduce the lessons so that they take something of benefit from it.
Yeah. Are you working with guys after their career's over? Or are they saying, hey, look, my career's over, my biggest money-making years are behind me, I don't need this whole team of business managers and advisors? Or what usually happens?
So ideally, the best client is the client who is a client during playing years, but then has also done a good job of saving and investing. So by the time they retire, they have a very healthy portfolio that you're still managing. So it may be that the day-to-day business management needs are not as intense,
not as hands-on,
but you still have a great client for a long time because they have a very sizable portfolio.
Yeah.
So several of my clients are people I've worked with for over 20 years, from infancy when they were drafted and maybe their rookie years through their entire playing careers now into retirement. And they're people that are financially secure, so they're never going to have a job unless they want to. And I tell them that with the money you're going to make in your career, if you do things well and luck breaks your way, the only job you should ever have is one that you want, not because you're motivated by the money. And so, it's nice to have those success stories where, there's a couple people that are, doing things like coaching local high school teams because they want to be part of the community or because they're passionate about it. And then there's other ones who are, trying, entrepreneurial things.
So in theory, if they've done things right and they were conservative, really their portfolio when they retire could be as big and as much wealth as they've ever had, and that could become their family office for generational wealth if they've done it right, which is the frustrating part when you hear the stories of they blew through 100 million. Like, oh my God, this is generational wealth. If you did things conservatively and took good advice and were smart about it, the rest, generations after you don't have to take a job because they have to work. They get to decide what they want to do for their passion, or they want whatever they want. And that must be really frustrating for you to see up close every day.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting. One thing you said is that I tell my clients, I say when you're earning your highest amount, right, and you're getting paid your professional sports contract, that money is never going to be replaced when you retire.
Yeah.
But the way I try and kind of, again, get them to think about financial things is, okay, you're never going to replace $15 million of salary annually. However, let's look at what your burn rate is. If you're going through $500,000 a year, right, and you have a portfolio that is $20 million, then if we get to a point where we're just generating 4% rate of return for you each year, that covers all of your living expenses, so you never have to tap into your principal. And so we can easily get to a position where a $20 million portfolio with very little risk at all is yielding 4%. And so that's kind of the mindset that I'm trying to get them in, which is let your money work for you, be smart about it, and then it will continue to grow forever, and you'll be able to pass on that wealth to your generations to follow.